Okay guys, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome to our first speaker series, our Owl Ears speaker series. It's supposed to be like, we're all ears, and we're rice owls. Anyways, today is our first talk. We're going to have a series of talks for 8 weeks, each Tuesday from 5:30 to 7:30. We'll always have dinner. And today we're going to address the question, who is God? And I am hoping that these talks are going to be a way for all of us to learn a little bit more about our faith, go a little bit deeper, but also to discuss and have an opportunity for dialogue. And today I am really excited for us to have Father Raphael Salzillo. He is currently a professor at the University of St. Thomas and has his PhD in philosophy. And it's just really cool, and so I'm really excited. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Claire. And thank you for saying that it's cool to have a PhD in philosophy. Not something I hear every day, believe me. All right, so I'm going to start with a prayer. And those of you who would like to join in are welcome. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. So I was invited here to talk about this topic, who is God? But I was told that, I should throw in, reasons for believing in God. And so really what I'm going to talk about is why I believe in God. Okay, so whether you think this is a good reason or not, it's the reasons that through my life I've come to. And I want to start by making a distinction between what causes us to believe something and the reasons that we believe something. So sometimes those are the same, right? Sometimes we come to believe something because we get convinced by somebody, by arguments or something like that. But for a whole lot of our beliefs, I think, if we're honest with ourselves, the cause of them is not sort of reasons. It's the way we were brought up, or it's sort of just kind of the culture that we grow up in. In a lot of cases, what we believe starts there, the sort of original cause of it. And, I'm just like anyone else in that regard. I didn't get argued into the Christian faith. I was raised in a Christian family. I was raised by parents who were Protestant Christians. And, I just, ever since I can remember, I believe in God. I believed in God. Now, sometimes you'll hear people say, well, religious people, they just believe in God because they were raised that way. The vast majority of them. And that's kind of true, right? Most of us believe what we believe because that's the way we're raised, at least at first. But at some point in our life, all of us have to, I guess we don't have to, but we ought to, I'm going to say, question the things we believe. We ought to ask, why do I believe this, right? Is it really just because that's what my parents believed? Couldn't my parents be wrong, right? Lots of other people's parents teach them things that are incompatible with what I believe. So they can't all be right. And so we question, and of course, being in college is one sort of stereotypical time when people question some of these things. So what I want to talk about is the reason that I came to over time. Kind of like you might say the arguments for the existence of God that ultimately I think are the best, or that maybe that just resonate the most with me. So a little bit of my history. I told you I'm from Oregon. I was raised as a Christian. I became Catholic when I was in high school because I came to believe that Catholicism was sort of the most true version of Christianity. And I was an undergraduate at Caltech in Pasadena, studied applied physics there, and at Caltech, so it's an intense kind of science place. They don't give BAs at Caltech, they only give BSs. So I had a friend who got a BS in English because he needed to graduate, and that was the thing he could get. As you might imagine, there's a lot of people who are skeptical about God and about religion there. And so my faith was challenged quite a good deal during my time there, and I eventually came to a kind of peace about it. But that wasn't really until I got to graduate school and got into philosophy for the first time. So I was in a PhD program at UC San Diego, also in applied physics. I was doing semiconductor device physics. So any electrical engineers in here? No? Okay, well, I taught the sort of the upper division class that all the engineers hate, the most physicsy classes that they all have to take. So I left without the PhD to enter the Dominican order. God called me away to become a priest. And the rest is history. I didn't think I would end up going on for another PhD in philosophy later. But that's what ended up happening. So when we're talking about proofs for the existence of God, I'm sure you've heard various proofs before. Things like, for example, Thomas Aquinas tries to prove the existence of God by asking what was the first mover. Everything in the world seems to be moved, right? This is moved by this, and this is moved by this. It can't go on forever. There must be a first mover that was not itself moved. A first cause, you might say, that wasn't itself caused. Those sorts of arguments, I don't want to denigrate those arguments. I think that they're good and they're valuable. But the argument I'm going to give is, I guess you might say, more all-encompassing. It's not just an intellectual argument for me. It's the way I came to see sort of my life and my walk with God. So in order to understand this argument, first you need to understand what a worldview is. So a worldview is kind of a total picture of the world, and all of us have one. At every point in our life, we always are interpreting the things that we see in the world, the things we encounter, the people we know, through a kind of, through a worldview, through a sort of understanding of what reality is. Now, a lot of times this is implicit, it's in the background. But what I want to suggest is that at bottom, even though all of us see the world in a little bit of a different way, but at bottom there's basically two options for how to look at the world. At least two options that I find plausible, that seem like options to me. So, and I put these on your handout because it kind of like just outlines what I'm going to say about each of these two worldviews. So, the first one is what I'll call the naturalistic worldview. Okay, this is the idea that nature, as we understand it through science, is all that there is. Now, it doesn't have to be all that there is, but basically all that matters. So I would include deists in this. So a deist is someone who believes that there is a God, but God is kind of way up there and doesn't care very much about us. Maybe he loves us in an abstract way, but God hasn't revealed himself to us. Right? There is a God, but it's kind of maybe he's the first cause, and then he just kind of set everything in motion. Didn't do anything else. I call it the ant farm God. Right? So he made the ant farm, but he's not the sort of person that shakes up the ant farm. He just like sits there and watches it go. So I think that a person who's a deist like that and a person who's an atheist or agnostic are kind of in the same boat with regard to like they're going to have to be consistent, except basically a naturalistic worldview. Okay, so what does that worldview say? Well, first of all, about the universe. So the universe is governed entirely by universal physical laws. Universal means they apply to everything, everywhere, at all times, without exception. These laws are deterministic and or random. The and or random is meant to make room for weird stuff like quantum mechanics, right? It's my view that, quantum mechanics fundamentally, as far as the theories we have now, is not does not help us with regard to like free will or things like this, because all you have determinism plus a kind of randomness. So these laws are deterministic and or random. You are a kind of biological machine. Okay, you are a lot of particles arranged in a very, very complex way, working according to these laws. And there's no explanation for the simplicity and elegance of the natural laws. It just happened that way. There's no explanation for that. So, so that's what the picture of the universe. What about human existence? So, you as an individual exist by blind chance. Okay, so you came into existence because this sperm and this ovum came together, and then you developed in this particular way in the womb, and etc. Right? It's just blind chance that you ended up the way that you are. There's no reason or purpose for your existence. Your existence doesn't matter from the point of view of the universe. Okay, what do I mean by that? Well, this is like, if you think of, I can't remember which satellite it was, as it left the solar system, turned around and took a picture of the Earth from way, way out there outside the solar system. And, it's just this tiny little dot in the midst of the vast universe. There's no particular reason to think that you, let alone the whole Earth, matters in the context of that universe, that giant mechanical universe. Okay, goodness and freedom. So, human knowledge. So there's no reason to think that you can know the truth. Let me say a little more about this, about why I think this. So the human mind, just like the rest of the human body, right? The human brain is just a machine, produced by natural processes. All your thoughts either are or arise from electrochemical processes within your skull. And electrochemical processes are neither true nor false, right? They just are. And so why would I think that if that's what I am, that I have the ability to know truth about the world? It starts to think I don't have any reason to believe that. Maybe I do, but how could that be? How could that be fit together with this picture of what I am? Goodness and freedom. There's no reason to think that you are free to choose the good. Okay, both you and I are made of the same stuff as rocks are made of. Okay, just the same basic physical particles. Right? Rocks are made of a different combination of those particles, right? But we're made of basically the same stuff, and we're governed by the same physical laws. So you differ from a rock only in degree of complexity, not in kind. This is really important. So, we tend to think that we're a very different kind of thing than a rock. But the difference between us and the rock, according to naturalism, is a matter of complexity. It's just a matter of the way the particles are put together. Right? It's not a matter of us being a fundamentally different sort of thing. We're all made of the same stuff. And so there's no good or freedom for a rock, and there isn't going to be for you. Not real freedom, right? No doubt we have the appearance of freedom in our lives, right? But in fact, when I raise my arm, I think I chose to do it. But if we knew enough about every particle in my arm during that moment when I raise it, and everything my brain is doing, we could tell another story where freedom doesn't enter into it at all, right? A story of electrochemical processes, a story of physical particles, and that story would be enough, right? And so the question would be then, for a naturalist, why think there's also this story that I raised my arm, right? The universe raised my arm. Right? That's what those particles were determined to do, or perhaps with some random chance thrown in for good measure. So love is meaningless, just like everything else. It's a kind of passing pleasure in life. The nature of the universe and of knowledge shows that life has no meaning. However, love can make us feel like our life has meaning, right? So this is interesting because we have no reason to believe life does have meaning. But love makes us feel like it, kind of like a drug, right? This is what drugs do. They make us feel like we're on top of the world. Cocaine, I hear, makes you feel fantastic. So love is a kind of, you might say, a sort of escape from the realities of life. And it has no meaning. What about morality? So human morality is a combination of blind instinct and delusion. So morality came about by chance and by the contingencies of evolution, according to the naturalistic view. And because everything human came about through the contingencies of evolution, right? According to this view. And so morality, there's nothing objective about it. It's just the way we are. It's just our instinct. And it's going to be affected a lot by our culture too, right? Once we evolve enough to have culture, it's going to affect that. It's going to be affected by that. So there's nothing objectively good or evil. What Hitler did is no worse or better than what Mother Teresa did. Right? There's not a criterion for distinguishing them. So there are no truths about how you should live your life. Justice does not exist. There is only the law of might makes right. And then finally, death. So this is fairly obvious. So soon enough, your life will end with no possibility of ultimate fulfillment. Now, I'm going to claim that you do have a desire for some kind of ultimate fulfillment. And that desire, even though maybe there might be moments in your life when you feel like you're on top of the world, right? They don't last. And we always want more. Like, I think the happiest person in the world, if you ask them, could you be more happy? I think it's obvious that they're going to say yes, right? Because none of us reaches that kind of perfect happiness that we desire. And so we have this desire, and the desire is vain. It's vain because it's impossible to achieve what we desire. Okay, so that's a picture of naturalism. I made a lot of big steps in that picture, okay? And I totally acknowledge that. There's a lot of things you could debate about what I said. Nevertheless, I think it does turn out that way in the end when you look closely at it. There are definitely arguments you can make. You can go off on this. You can say, well, maybe there's another way to account for morality. There's conversations you can have that I'm glossing over to some extent. Because I've struggled with those things myself over the years and just decided I don't see it. I don't see it. Nevertheless, there's going to be a Q&A, so hit me with it. That'll be fun. So that's the one worldview that I want to put forward. The other worldview is what I'm calling the Christian worldview, but I put Judaic and Islamic in parentheses because I don't claim really to be distinguishing. I don't claim to be making an argument that distinguishes between those per se in this talk. So you might say this. You might say, well, once we reject the naturalistic worldview, the question of which of those three religions is true is kind of an in-house debate, right? So now, but what I'm going to be saying is really based on Christianity, but I think that Islam and Judaism could say similar things about much of what I'm saying. Okay, so with that aside. So let's go through these categories again. The universe. So the universe is governed by God's providence. God chose to make a universe that's ordered and rational so that much of it functions according to simple and beautiful laws. Now, I used the word simple and beautiful when I was going through naturalism. I didn't explain that. The reason I used them, so what I said is I said that we have no explanation, according to naturalism, for why the laws are simple and beautiful. Now, you might push back and say, what do you mean beautiful? Well, beauty, I teach philosophy of science, beauty throughout the history of science has been a criterion for good theories. Finding a theory that's beautiful has always, it was one of Einstein's biggest motivations. It was one of his big reasons he was skeptical about quantum mechanics, was because it didn't seem beautiful for, so to speak, God to throw dice. So beauty really is something that scientists take seriously, whether right or wrong, that's true. And the point here is that, from a Christian point of view, we have an explanation for that, because the beauty is a reflection of God. And in science, anytime somebody asks the question, well, why do we want a theory to be beautiful? People kind of throw out some stuff, but basically people scratch their heads. It just seems to work. So, human existence. So you exist as an individual willed by God. God chose to create you. You are not an accident. He made you because he believed it would be good if you existed. And you're here for a reason. You're here to manifest God's goodness, and to bring God's goodness to others. There's a purpose to your being, which comes from the reason God created you. Human knowledge, God made you made you and all of us that we might know truth as he does. Okay, so we are designed to be able to know the truth. That's why we can. Right? On a naturalistic picture, you might ask, well, why is it that we even have the ability to study the universe in the amazing ways that we do? Right? Why would you expect that would be the case? It's not necessarily a survival, like a survivability trait that evolution would select for people who are good at making computers. Right? No, I mean, not really. Something else happened there. Your mind is made in the image of God, of God's mind. So it has the ability to grasp his creation. You're not merely a machine, but somehow transcend the physical realm. Your reason is not unreliable. It's a reflection of God's reason. Okay, and this is why we can know that whatever the relationship is between the electrochemical processes going on in my brain and this experience that I have of seeing all of you all. See, I've come to the South and I'm starting to learn how to speak the lingo. I'm seeing all of y'all sitting here. Like somewhere between those, I don't know what's going on, but I know that I'm designed to know the truth. And something is going on beyond the naturalistic picture. Okay, goodness and freedom, you're created in God's image, able to choose the good. You are different in kind from a rock. Okay? It's not just a difference of complexity, like you're a different kind of thing. You are loved by God in a way that the rock is not loved. A worm is loved by God in a way that a rock is not loved. You're something more perfect than the rock. Because you are a fundamentally different kind of thing from the rock, you can act in a fundamentally different way, i.e. freely. There's no good for a rock. Okay, what do I mean by that? Well, like, if I have a rock here, I should have brought a rock, but if I have a rock here, like, is it better if it's here or there? Or up or down? I mean, Aristotle thought that rocks were better when they're on the ground than when they're up in the air, because that's more their natural place, right? But, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm a fan of Aristotle, but, like, come on. Like, that's not better for the rock. Neither one of them is better for the rock. But there is a good for you, right? There's a good for you, not just for you, but for trees, too, there's a good, right? We know what a good tree is. It's a tree that's flourishing. A brown tree that's, like, losing its limbs is a bad tree. Something bad has happened to it. It's not flourishing. So there's a good for you. You have free will and you're not entirely bound by the physical. Okay, love. Love in this life is a reflection of God's nature. For God is love. Love is not merely a feeling, it's a kind of likeness to God in us. Love is not merely an empty pleasure, it's a divine gift with a purpose. It's not a drug, but it's a part of our destiny as a human being. Love reminds us that we are created to give of ourselves, and we do that in imitation of God, right? God gave of himself by creating the world, right? God didn't need us. He didn't need the world. He was perfect. And yet, God's love diffuses itself. It gives, and so should ours. Imperfect love that we have here gives us hope that we will one day taste perfect love. Right? The imperfect love, all of our love here is imperfect, even the best. But it points towards it points beyond itself to something else. Morality. Human goodness and morality are a reflection of God's goodness. They're written into human nature because we're created in his image. There is objective good and evil because God's nature is objective. Individual desires and choice can thwart this moral law. Nevertheless, justice is real, and God will judge us according to it. Friedrich Nietzsche was incorrect, although he did see correctly that without God, we have nothing. And I put nihilism here. So, and then finally death. So soon your life will end, but your fate will continue beyond life on earth. You have a desire for unending happiness, and that desire is not vain because it can be fulfilled. Yet since the desire is, in a certain respect, infinite, it can only be fulfilled by something infinite. Loving union with God, our Creator. Okay, so that's the two pictures of two worldviews that I want to describe here. And of course, I'm painting with broad strokes. But those are the two, to me, candidates for what the truth of the world could be like. Now, one question to ask is it just wishful thinking to choose view two, right? Is it just like, well, I like the second one better, right? Because what I like doesn't necessarily correspond to what's true, right? It's because I like it. But a better question to ask is, which worldview allows us to make sense of our human experience? Right? This is kind of the question that Immanuel Kant asked. What are the preconditions to the intelligibility of our experience as human beings? What has to be true in order for the most basic things that seem to be true, or at least most of them? Which worldview provides the possibility of knowledge, of knowing truth, which is what we think we can do, right? With science, for example, we think we can know the truth. And which worldview allows us to make sense of human rationality? That somehow all this crap going on in my skull actually corresponds to something real in the world. Like, it actually has the ability to latch on and describe the world, even abstractly. Not just, this chair, but the concept of a chair, right? Are we really justified in believing that we can do that? Okay, so what's the key here? The key difference between these two views, because remember, I threw deism into the naturalism category, so that's God's there, he's just not helping us, right? The difference between these two views is this: contact of the non-contingent mind with the contingent mind. God revealing himself to those who are helpless without him. Helpless to know, helpless to do good. God telling us that, look, I did create the world rational, right? I know you think it would be nice if I did, but God revealing himself and telling us, yes, that is the case. That is the difference between the two. And this is essentially, you might say, a proof by contradiction. So, supposing that these are the only two views, which I haven't really proved, but I think can be argued that broadly these are the two worldviews that you can take. Supposing that that's true, naturalism leads to nihilism. And then you might say, well, maybe nihilism is true. You have to understand what nihilism is. Like, nihilism is the belief that knowledge is impossible. Okay, so if nihilism is true, it's perfectly consistent to say it's not true. Right? You can think of nihilism as a kind of worldview that's it's like a black hole, right? What happens with the event horizon of a black hole? Well, you cross over it, that's all she wrote. Right? Even if you're a beam of light. Right? Even light cannot escape the event horizon. So nihilism is kind of analogous to that, in that once you take on nihilism as a worldview, your worldview is both indefensible and unassailable. It's both indefensible and unassailable because you've rejected reason. Right? Because if there's no knowledge, we can't even know that our reason is correct. And I'll tell you this, I don't have an irrational argument for the existence of God that could convince a nihilist. So, in a way, this is a kind of proof by contradiction, either nihilism or something like Christianity. And again, I don't in any way claim to have excluded Islam and Judaism from this. So, if this is right, then, when someone asks for reasons to believe in Christianity, it's in fact the case that every reason points to Christianity. Because you can't have reasoning without it. So, a few objections, then we'll get to Q&A. So one objection: atheists are often very moral people, right? They believe in morality. Absolutely true. Okay, so what are you doing saying atheists are moral? I'm not saying atheists are moral. I'm saying to the degree that an atheist is a morally good person, a morally better person than me, they're inconsistent. Because in order to ground morality, you can't do it with naturalism. And so, essentially, one way to put it is they have to borrow from my worldview in order to be a better person than me, which many of them, I'm sure, succeed in doing, in being better persons than me. What about evil? Okay, problem of evil, right? This is a big one. I can't go into this for a long period of time, but let me just say a few things. So, how could a good God, create a world with so much evil in it, as our world has? Right? It's a big topic. My answer to it is, I don't know. Right? But I shouldn't expect to know. I don't think you can set up that argument in such a way that it shows that the existence of God is a contradiction. And we can say a few things about why God might permit evil. So, for example, the Christian tradition has always distinguished between doing evil and allowing evil. It denies that God would do evil, but he permits it. St. Augustine said that God, rather than eliminating all evil, God chose to bring even greater good out of evil. Now, I'm not endorsing the sort of simplistic view that everything evil happens has some greater good immediately attached to it, right? I'm not endorsing that view. Nevertheless, some of it does. All of us know that no pain, no gain, right? At least some of it does. Some evil is caused by human freedom, from humans doing evil. And you might think that, for example, well, maybe it was a greater good for God to allow human freedom, knowing that there could be evil, than it would be to make us automatons. Why would it be better? Well, because with freedom you can love. Right? So maybe that's part of the explanation. But I don't have a complete explanation for you at all. And again, I don't think we should expect it, because if the God that I'm describing exists, he's infinite, and his mind is infinitely beyond ours. And we shouldn't expect to be able to, and he's also outside of time, right? He sees the whole picture. I sometimes say that like it's like we're standing on the sideline watching the parade go by, and God's up in the Goodyear blimp. Sees the whole thing from beginning to end, right? And so he sees the whole context. With a lot of this, it's just that we just can't know. We can talk about that more in the Q&A if you want. The third objection is, what about the judgment of God? Because if God is good, if God is holy, then, if we're honest with ourselves, I think we fall short a lot of the things we know are right. Right? All of us have kind of more moral sense in ourselves, and all of us know that we transgress it all the time, right? And we feel bad about it. I think if we're honest with ourselves. Christianity explains this in terms of original sin, this kind of selfishness that penetrates us. But the question here is, if God expects us to be good and we're doomed to fail, what gives? Is our fate really going to be good? And of course, the Christian answer to this is the incarnation, Jesus Christ. God became man to save us through his love, through expressing his love through Jesus Christ. I won't get into the theology of that. And that's a great mystery. But what does it reveal to us about God? Well, it reveals to us the fact that God is merciful and not just just. Like that God has the ability to give to people, specifically people who repent of their sins, what they don't deserve, which is his mercy. Right? And this is what Christianity offers us. So he leaves us free to accept or reject that mercy, to reject his love, and to reject his invitation to friendship with him. Yet the choice objectively, I don't know, when I consider these two worldviews, the choice doesn't seem that hard. Because at the end of the day, only friendship with God is going to fulfill the greatest desire of my heart and of your heart, which is to be fully and finally and endlessly happy. So I want to open it up to questions. Don't worry, I'm not a jerk when I take questions. Because I realize that I've glossed over a lot, right? This is a big picture talk. Yeah.
So I have 3 questions. The first one, Christians keep talking about we are made in the likeness of God. How are we like God, but we are so limited in our knowledge and in our powers that we are almost imperfect?
Yeah. That's really good. So, excuse me, sorry. So one question you might ask, so here's an analogy. So like a painter might paint a beautiful painting of someone. And that painting is let's say somebody paints a picture of me. Okay. The painting looks like me, right? It's really in my image. But the painting, can't do math, can't even do philosophy. The painting can't talk. There's a ton of powers that I have the painting doesn't have, and yet the painting is a kind of reflection of me in some way. And so I think that when we talk about being made in the image of God, normally that has to do with 2 things in us. Our freedom and our intellect. So our ability to understand the truth and to do the good, to choose the good. And that those things are in some way a reflection of God's nature. Now, how is that, spelling out exactly how that works? I'd have to understand God's nature, right? To be able to really spell it out. And I don't. I'm not a theologian anyway, right? But even they don't understand it.
Was it in the prophecy, in the Christian view, that we needed to be saved because we are so imperfect?
It was, so prophecy is complex, yeah. Getting into the Old Testament prophecies would probably take us a little too far afield. But yes, the coming of Christ was foretold. But it was not recognized at the time it was foretold. questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just curious. Do you think we can deduce from our rational faculties that God has or the universe has a beginning, that God created the universe with a beginning? Because a lot of the causality we see here is accidentally ordered causality. So, for example, my parents, I guess they potentially did, but that would be considered accidentally ordered causality because they created me. But if they died, they're not like puppets who control me, right?
Yeah.
And it just seems to me that type of causality there can be an infinite regress of that type of causality.
Yeah. So this actually gets into some subtle issues. So I guess I'm a little undecided on that question. So Thomas Aquinas thought the answer was that you could have had an infinite chain of causes into the past. He followed Aristotle in that. Yeah. Thomas Aquinas thought that the fact that the world had an actual beginning in time was revealed to us. We couldn't know the reason.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm kind of undecided. I'm not sure. Yeah. But I would say that argument, the argument that he actually gives, is not just about billiard ball hitting each other.
Yeah.
Since the beginning of time. It's about a first cause of causes, so to speak. Yeah. Okay, in the back there.
Me?
No, behind you. Sorry.
Okay.
I think atheists still largely grab onto the problem of evil as a question that theists can't quite solve, because free will can only go so far.
Yeah.
For the greater good can only go so far, but then you have things like natural disasters. And it's like, well, maybe evil in general needs to happen for the greater good to happen, but why so much? And so if a God is all good, why so much of this what seems like unnecessary natural evil that's not caused by free will?
So good. That's really good. And I think this is the form of the problem of evil that's the most difficult to answer. It's not the one that says that's a contradiction, because I don't think it is a contradiction. But it's the one that says, okay, fine, maybe God would allow some evil, but why so much? I think that's the one that has more weight. So I think that what you're pointing at is good. And that it's difficult for the theist. Now, I mean, the response that I would give to that, I guess, is that, so first I would say, I don't know, I can't explain evil. But then I would say that the question really comes down to a kind of burden of proof question, right? Of like, what counts as evading the problem? And it becomes very subjective. Like so now we're saying, well, there's too much evil. Well, who am I how can I know, that it's too much evil? And what does too much evil mean? Christians, or at least Catholics, do not believe that God created the best world he could possibly create. At least I maybe shouldn't say what Catholics believe. I don't think that's a doctrine. That's Thomas Aquinas' view. I sometimes confuse them. just to put my cards on the table. So I have to be fair. I don't think it's a doctrine. But Thomas Aquinas thought, no, God could always create a better world, right? But the world he created was good. It's good. And he was satisfied with that answer. I don't blame you if you're not. but I think the point, Thomas Aquinas' point is that creation was a pure gift. And that God chose a particular order of things because he saw the order as a whole as good. When it comes down to it, I think the problem of evil is something that is very hard to weigh. It's very hard to weigh. And I think people who have suffered a lot understandably struggle more with it. Although interestingly, not all people who struggle a lot. I've known people who went through horrible suffering and their faith sustained them through it. But in lots of cases, people ask the question, is there really a God? How could he allow this to happen? And the problem weighs a lot heavier on you when you're in that situation. And I don't pretend to have an answer to that. I really like Peter Van Inwagen's book on this, on the problem of evil. I don't know if you know who he is. He's a Notre Dame philosopher. I think he does a pretty good job. And saying up front, too, that all he's giving is a defense, not a theodicy. So a theodicy would be explaining why God allows evil, right? He said, I don't think we can do that. All I can do is tell a little story about how it might be, right? Okay, maybe that's all we can do. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if
that's good.
Anything else, yeah?
So you listed several, in the Abrahamic religions for that worldview.
Yeah.
But if in like other religions that like polytheism
Yeah,
or not perhaps that they don't necessarily discount the existence of God, that they believe in like a greater being, how in that context would they fall in one of the two
Yeah.
worldviews that you presented?
so, that's a good question, it's a really good question. I think that generally those sorts of religions don't have a very unified sort of doctrine, and they normally don't claim that God as revealed. Put it this way, they often don't claim that they normally don't claim that God is all-knowing, and that he's revealed himself to us. And that's kind of what I'm depending on here, because that's what makes our faith certain, is the authority of God. But so the various Hindu religions, for example, usually they have competing deities. It's not really clear that any of them is in a place, so to speak, the gods seem to have the same problem as us.
Yeah.
Not being able to know.
Yeah, like I was thinking of like, in the pagan religions, like there's all the different gods and they're not omnipotent.
And omnipotent or omniscient.
Yeah, or omniscient,
Yeah.
and so they do have like the clashing worldviews, except they have powers.
Yeah, so they have powers, but not infinite powers. And I don't think that they can fill the role. Now, whether I'm going to put them in, so I'm just going to say that those worldviews, are ultimately going to reduce to the same kind of nihilism as the first one, because the gods are not going to be able to ground knowledge for us and ground these things, because the gods too have the same problems as us. That they can't, that they don't have perfect knowledge. They don't have perfect love. They're kind of jerks to each other, just like we are. I mean, obviously the Greek gods looked a lot like the Greeks, right? Only big and powerful. So, yeah, but good question, yeah.
I have a little bit of a follow-up to that one, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Because your talk with this sort of dichotomy seems very similar to David Bentley Hart's book on the experience of God. Where he says there are two options, the absurd worldview or the worldview of purpose.
I didn't know that. I know him personally, but I haven't read his books.
Oh, really?
I've read some of his online stuff, but I haven't read his books. That's kind of strange, right? Yeah.
So I was going to ask that because he brings in some of these other Eastern faiths and uses them as part of the option of purpose, right? But his approach seems to have a more mystical theological approach.
Well, it
whereas
would,
this
because
is
he
a
did
much
Bentley Hart, yeah.
this is a much more Western approach.
You're right, yeah.
I was going to ask you if you had a comparison, but if you haven't looked into that book.
No, it's funny, I haven't read, I mean, I know some of the stuff he's written just from talking to him, but I haven't actually read it. So, yeah. Yeah, and I know also from other people that argue against him, and he's a real controversialist, so, yeah. Yeah.
Can you explain more? You said how naturalism leads to nihilism, and can you explain more?
Yeah, I didn't completely explain that. So, can't get everything all at once, but, so the idea is something like this. I mean, it depends a lot on, at least in this talk, it depended a lot on the claim that, look, our thoughts are just electrochemical processes in our brain, or caused by them in some way, according to naturalism. And why think that those would be true or false? They just are. We don't have it's not to say that we don't know things, because it seems obvious that we do know things, right? But naturalism can't account for that. The idea that we know things doesn't cohere with that. So I mean, the polemical way I put it is this, that, people who think they know stuff have to borrow from a Christian worldview in order to justify that. Not in order to believe it, right? You can believe whatever you want, but in order to justify that. Naturalism doesn't have the resources to be able to justify that.
Doesn't science explain everything?
What's that?
Doesn't science explain everything?
So you need to be able to have knowledge before science can explain anything, right? Because science is a kind of knowledge. So that's the basic outline of it. Now, there's actually a lot more to say about that, but I don't want to. Yeah, I would have to give you a longer lecture maybe.
Are you saying that naturalism relies on electrochemical processes or our thoughts, but that does not equate to knowledge? and then like.
Yes.
No.
So the argument would go something like this. I have knowledge. That seems clear. I can't deny that I have at least some knowledge. Okay. Having knowledge about the world or about whatever doesn't seem to fit together with the kind of thing that I am, which is just a body of little particles moving around, right? Particles are not true or false, right? Movements are not true or false, they just are. And so, how can I fit together this idea that I have knowledge with this account of what I am? They don't seem to fit, as opposed to the other worldview where they do fit. Whatever I am, and maybe, I didn't talk about what a human being is for a Christian, but whatever I am, it's not just the little particles. Like there's something more. And I know that because I have knowledge. Right? And there's no way of accounting for the fact that I have knowledge. From the point of view of naturalism, I'm claiming there's I could go further on that argument as well. I think there's many other things that have to do with knowledge that can't be explained by the atoms picture. But that's the basic idea. Do we have time still? Okay, go ahead.
This is just a question following off of that. In this case, how are you defining knowledge? Would you not consider knowledge if we're falling under this naturalist worldview where we're talking about everything is electrochemical processes? Would we not say knowledge could be just the processing of stimuli and just making decisions based off of that in a
good.
greater argument?
Good. So that is not what I mean by knowledge. So according to the way I'm using the word knowledge, computers don't have knowledge, for example. Because a computer is kind of an example of what you're talking about, right? Yeah. Something that takes in stimuli and responds. Yeah, so I think we have something more than a computer has, or a computer ever could actually have, which is that we understand the meanings of our words. So we don't just take in inputs and put out outputs. We actually know what we're doing. We do it. So there's a famous argument that by a philosophy professor named John Searle called the Chinese room. Anybody heard this argument before? Okay, you heard it because you were in my class. So this is an argument for this conclusion. So John Searle is a big atheist. I knew him when I was at Berkeley for a while. He's a big atheist, so he's not doing this with any religious motivations. But the argument is basically that, he's not saying we couldn't create a mind artificially. But what he is saying is that no computer, as we understand computers today, or anything like the way we understand computers today, could ever be a mind. Okay, and here's his argument. So he says, imagine that there's this room, and John Searle is inside of it. And inside this room, he has a giant book that has, this book is entirely written, so the book is written in English, but it has Chinese characters. So it explains, it has basically a huge list of characters, like a group of Chinese characters, and then an arrow, and another group of Chinese characters. Okay, that's what the book has instructions on sort of a mapping from one set of Chinese characters to another. Now Searle says, I don't know Chinese. I don't know any Chinese. So that's part of the point of the example. So out here you have native Chinese speakers who take some Chinese characters and put them on a little slip. I can't draw Chinese characters. I'm sorry, but and put them in a slot in the room. John Searle picks up the thing of characters. He looks up in the book what his response should be, and he puts those. He has a little basket full of Chinese characters. He finds the characters that fit, puts them on the thing, and puts it back out. Okay, so here's what Searle says. He says, if I got good enough at this and fast enough at it, I could fool the person out here into thinking I'm a native Chinese speaker in the room. Okay? And as Searle puts it, he's like, but I don't know a damn word of Chinese. That's his voice, sorry. But I don't know a damn word of Chinese, right? He's like, and therefore, since all I'm doing is what a computer does, no computer could ever know Chinese either. So even though he could behave in the way that a Chinese speaker behaves, he still wouldn't know. And he has a mind, right? Computers, he has a brain that we all agree that he's capable of knowing the meanings of words and stuff like this, but he has no idea what he's saying. If you ask yourself the question, could you ever learn Russian from a Russian dictionary, right? No, I mean, no, right? However, if someone gave you instructions on how to respond in Russian, you could do that, right? And when you're doing that, you're doing exactly what a computer does, taking in inputs, following rules, and putting out outputs. So that's why I would say that the Chinese room doesn't have knowledge, and neither does a computer have knowledge, at least in the sense that I'm talking about it, where we understand the meanings of our thoughts. I mean, have you ever asked yourself this question? This is a philosopher question. Do you understand the meanings of your thoughts? I think I do. I'm pretty sure I do. And that's, I think, what seems to be clearly different between the Chinese room and our minds. So that's the kind of knowledge I'm talking about. And this is, the Chinese room is an illustration of like, I mean, John Searle is an atheist, and he totally is, big into technology. He thinks maybe someday we'll figure out a way of imitating what the brain does, and then we'll be able to make a real mind. He's like, I don't know what the brain does, but does something, and I'm John Searle, I don't believe in anything but the physical, so we've got to, somehow it has to happen, right? But his own argument makes it kind of like, well, it at least proves that computers are not the way. I ask my students sometimes when I give this example, I say, okay, so there's no such thing as true artificial intelligence, and there never will be. Nevertheless, could a computer take over the world? Like Skynet in Terminator movies? Of course it could, because it can still behave just like the thing, right? He doesn't know Chinese, but he can still do anything, like theoretically, right, if he's really fast with the book and all this. This is all just, it's a zany thought experiment. But theoretically, a computer could take over the world, right? It just wouldn't know it was taking over the world. It'd just be following instructions and machine learning or whatever. Yeah.
Wouldn't an argument against this be like it is learning and learning is necessary for knowledge?
Well, it's learning, but what is learning? So learning is a computer essentially reprogramming itself. And why does it do that? Well, it does it because it's been programmed to do that. This is like some of the new AIs that have come out, like the chat GPT stuff, right? Where the makers of it don't know what it's doing. Because it's been programmed to iteratively rewrite its own code, essentially. So that it does new and more complex things, right? But it's been programmed to be able to do that. Right? So although it learns, what learning is in this case is just acquiring the ability to put out more complex sentences, for example, here, right? It's John Searle getting a more complex book, or maybe the book has instructions and has blank pages at the back. It has instructions for John on how, as he gets more messages in, he can start adding to the complexity of his responses. And maybe he gives him instructions in English, right? Doesn't tell him what the characters mean. It just says, okay, well, put these characters in this order once you've seen this 5 times, right? Okay, we'll do that. He continues with the book, right? But he still has no freaking idea what he's doing, right? But he does learn in that sense, in the sense of behavioral development. Good. Yeah.
What role does the soul play in all of this? Like,
Soul?
yes.
Gotta play some role.
Yeah, so I think
Yeah.
like one of the big ideas in Christianity, well, like in the worldview too that you mentioned was the existence of God, and for within that worldview, like there's the idea of the soul, but
Yeah.
then I don't know if there's a way in which the soul could fit in to the first worldview, because it's not something physical. So I don't know. I mean, I think
Yeah.
this is also a philosophy thing.
So let me put it this way. I have a different concept of the soul than I think a lot of, because I accept Aristotle's conception of a soul, not Plato's. So in other words, Plato's is the one that I think most people sort of think of, which is that the soul is like a little ghost that's attached to you, and it's kind of like the little driver inside of your body, moving your arms and doing that stuff, right? That's sort of a Platonic view of the soul. I think that view of the soul is problematic for various reasons. Aristotle's view of the soul, though, could actually fit into the first picture, potentially. It's just, well, if you don't take all of Aristotle's view, if you just take certain parts of it. So for Aristotle, the soul is the source of life in something. And so a living thing is alive because it has a soul. Now, a naturalist would have to the only way that could be fit into a naturalist view is if a naturalist said, well, this would really be going beyond naturalism as I've defined it. We'd have to say, well, we need to have something to explain the difference between living things and non-living things. And so
I see.
we need to suppose that there's some guiding force in living things and call that soul. Right, so they'd have to say something like that. They'd have to go beyond the sort of materialist naturalism. But you could argue that that's a form of naturalism still, because they could still say, well, it's just natural. It's that way. So, I mean, maybe you're onto something that would have to be investigated. But the problem is I don't think that's going to get you as far as the understanding of meaning. This is why Aristotle thinks, and Aquinas thinks, and I think that humans have a different kind of soul than other things. So I think plants have souls. I think animals have souls. I just don't think they have rational souls.
Right. Yes.
And I think that actually a rational soul has to have something that transcends the material world in a way that that other kinds of souls don't have to. Anyway, I don't want to get into my dissertation here. This is a dangerous place to go.
So, where did Aristotle's view come from? The anima? His view?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that's right. I mean, largely, it's assumed in other places
And
in his
then,
work, but that's where it's mostly described, yeah.
and then Plato's is from.
Plato's, Plato bounces around on the soul too. So Plato's a little bit squirmy on this.
Yeah.
But the Phaedo is probably the classic place where Socrates says,
Okay. Yeah. That's what I was thinking. I was thinking
yeah,
Plato and
yeah.
then the anima, and I was trying to think of what places you were referring to.
Yeah, yeah. And the Phaedo. Also the Alcibiades. That dialogue is even more explicit about the soul, but it's lesser known dialogue.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah.
I don't know how much time we have.
I think just one more, yeah.
One more question? Okay.
This one kind of concerns the nature of hell, right? And, I guess.
So you're going to end us on a really positive note.
Just super positive, yeah. It concerns the divine attributes of God, right? And so we attach a lot of them to him. So one of them is all good, right? And so endless mercy, compassion, perhaps, but also justice. And so a lot of atheists find it contradictory of saying, why would there be, as form of punishment for this finite world, eternal damnation as opposed to something closer to reconciliation, as in purgatory or something?
Yeah, well, this is what David Bentley Hart would say. Actually, this is his big push. David Bentley Hart is Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, but I don't think his view represents essentially representative of the Orthodox. So I don't know, but I would say this: the traditional way in which it's been thought of is that a person, the kind of person that goes to hell, is a person who leaves this life with their will set upon evil. In other words, set upon the rejection of God, the rejection of goodness, to set upon selfishness, and that at the end of life, that is incompatible with being in the presence of God, because at the end of life, there's no more, so to speak, development and learning morally. Our will is set, and that our destiny is determined by that, and so there's a sense in which it's not that God said, I don't like you, you're going to burn forever, right? It's that it's actually incompatible. The continued existence in the presence of God is incompatible with that choice of the will. Now, how many people? So I do believe in hell, but how many people are in hell? I'm going to be very, very agnostic, right? And I'm going to be very very circumspect about that, because it is very hard. I think the other piece of this is that the interaction between God's mercy and God's justice is something that we won't see, we won't understand in this life completely. God's mercy is just another side of his justice. But fully explaining, you could say more about it, but fully explaining it is, we can't really expect in this life. Going over the extra question? Okay, definitely last question for sure this time.
Follow up from that question.
Yeah.
So if there is the sense of like when a person dies, they're like if they're fixed on rejecting God and like choosing evil, and thus will be like sentenced to hell and eternal damnation. If God is all knowing at the very beginning and He loves us all, why would He create us knowing that that is our destiny?
You guys aren't going easy on me. Yeah, it's a good question. So again, I don't know, but one question is this: why did God choose to create a world where people would freely choose evil at all? In a way, that's a similar question. Of course, what follows from that is that some people would be damned. Well, not necessarily. Maybe if people just chose to do a little bit of evil here and there, like if they just chose to slam the door in people's face once in a while, or something like that, maybe you wouldn't have anybody going to hell. But why would God choose to make that world? I don't know. I don't know. But I would say this, that I don't think God is obligated to create the best world He can. And so it may be that God just chose to create a world that's overall good. And in fact, He knew ahead of time that some creatures would choose to be damned, but He didn't think that that was a reason not to create the world by itself. Something like that. See, free will is a real mystery here because God knows what we're going to freely choose ahead of time, right? But it doesn't mean we're not free. And He doesn't always want the result to be. Were you going to ask a question? No, okay. You were just trying to get your arm out of the sleeve.
Yes.
Right. So I'm not going to say that's a great answer. But you also invited a philosopher here, so a theologian would probably do a better job with some of these more theological things. I am a priest, but theology's not my bag. Okay, thank you guys. I really appreciate it.